Wander Wealthy Podcast, episode 267. Hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Wander Wealthy Podcast. This is the second episode back from a very long break, the Spring Break Money Coach School. If you didn't get a chance to go through that fun series, I suggest you go back the last 13 episodes before last week's episode and give it a listen. Tune in. You can binge listen to all of these episodes. They're the most highly listened to episodes in the Wander Wealthy podcast universe since I have pivoted from being strictly a money coach to coaching money coaches. And I put them in an order that would make sense for you if you are new and starting your money coaching business. So go check those out. I and my editors put a lot of work into getting those up for you over the springtime. And now here we are in the summer. And I have an exciting episode in store for you. Before we dive in, if you're brand new to this show, my name is Tess Wicks. I'm the founder of Wander Wealthy, host of this podcast, and business coach for financial coaches who once happened to be a financial coach herself. And actually, I still am. I still have a handful of clients, but now we focus on supporting the fellow money coaches out there in the world looking to start their business or figure out what might not be working in their business and really get to a place where you have a client base that you're working with, and you also know how to attract and sell your services and also, of course, delight the clients that you already have. Today, we're focused on that attraction piece / the selling piece. I really want to dive into something that we end up, once my clients get to a point where they've built their programs and they've done all that market research and they're kind of out there marketing and trying to sell their services, and they're getting stuck somewhere along the line and they can't quite figure out what's going wrong or why they might not be getting clients in the door. This is what we do in terms of workshopping and really like auditing and analyzing where we need to put our focus. Because I think that's such a difficult thing when you start your own business is you don't know where to focus, or maybe you don't have that, 10,000 foot view, being able to go and see the forest through the trees sort of thing when you are on your own and you're trying to understand like where's the breakdown here? What is happening? Why am I not getting clients? So I always present to my clients these kind of 3 different bottlenecks that can exist in your business and how to assess for them, and also kind of, brainstorm some things that we can do to clear those bottlenecks so that you can finally get your clients in the door, right? So if you're struggling to get financial coaching clients, you have a really great program and framework that you want to sell, you've done the research, you know where your clients are hanging out, but something isn't quite happening, then this is the episode for you. So let's go ahead and dive into these 3 bottlenecks and see if we can't clear some blockages up for you and get you some clients in the door. All right. So the first bottleneck is understanding if you're getting in front of leads. Okay, so this is the first thing to check for. Do you feel like you're getting in front of the right people that would ultimately want to buy your services? Mostly you can figure this out if you can look at your audience and determine if you have an audience or not. Now, this isn't saying like, do you have a big audience? You can just have 100 or a couple hundred people who are following along with your content, who are, maybe following your page or in your group. That still is an audience. I mean, if you consider like that being actual people in a room that you're in, that would feel like a pretty huge audience. So don't compare yourself and your audience to other people's audience. Just consider like, am I able to find my audience? Do I know how to find my clients? Do I know where they're at? Do I know where they're spending time? Do I know who they are? Do I know how to get in front of them? And then also ask yourself, are you spending time in front of them regularly? And a lot of times, if my clients are struggling with figuring out where their potential clients are at, where their audience is, who they are. I mean, we always go back to the market research. I say, maybe we need to talk to more people who you believe are your ideal clients and figure out where they do spend time, who they do follow, who they do listen to, where they do get their advice and their information. And ultimately, what you're looking for here are the communities, okay? A big thing that you can do when you're just starting out in your business is when you don't have like a big captive audience to begin with, then you can go out and find captive audiences that already exist that are made up of your ideal clients or would have a good portion of your ideal clients inside of them, right? So these are things like, in-person networking groups, maybe online Facebook groups, even just like fellow followers of other content creators, other influencers, other coaches who aren't necessarily like your competition. I wouldn't really go that route because that can be a little bit shady. And also it's just like, then you're just trying to compete versus really trying to create community and provide value and expand the knowledge of an already existing group by being like the money person in that community. So look for these communities. Where do your ideal clients hang out? Where do they spend time? Where do they get advice? Where do they go to for support? And identify those first and foremost. If you don't know where those are, we got to go back to the market research. We got to talk to some of these people and ask them straight up, like, where do you spend time online? Where do you spend time offline? Where do you go to get advice? And then determine yourself, are you spending time regularly in those places? And if not, this is your bottleneck, is that you're not getting in front of your leads. And that's probably why you're not getting financial coaching clients. So those are the first two things, right? Do you know how to find them? And then are you spending time there regularly? Lastly, you want to ask yourself, are you actually interacting there? If you're an introvert like me, you might just want to be a silent player in this game, but you cannot be. And that's just kind of the hard truth of entrepreneurship is if you want people to know who you are, know what you stand for, know your brand, and then ultimately learn that you are an authority in this space, really work to trust you and see that you have the solution to some of their biggest questions and biggest struggles, and ultimately work with you and invest to work with you, then you need to be active. You need to be interacting. You need to be engaging. And so you can always start out by simply interacting in these communities in a way where, you don't have to always be reaching for the sale, right? No need to propose marriage on the first date, but simply just becoming part of this community. Another thing that I really love to encourage my clients to do, and I like to do myself, is connect with the admins of these groups or the leaders of these groups, of these communities, or the other people who are doing things really well in these communities and kind of leading a charge, leading something, and see if you can't provide, a strategic collaboration opportunity where, most likely we're looking for communities that aren't run by our competition, aren't run by fellow money coaches, aren't run by people who would maybe see that as you trying to step on the toes and monopolize the community, but instead, people who what you have to offer is of parallel interest to what they're offering and what they're facilitating for the community. And they would see the value in you coming in and kind of being the money person, being that guiding light that can answer those financial questions for that specific audience and demographic. So interacting first, just, inside of the community, being really involved, but also being willing to put yourself out there and kind of throw your name in the ring for being able to lead some trainings or just become known as the authority on money in the space. Okay. So that's the first bottleneck is are you getting in front of your leads? Are you getting in front of the right people? If you feel like you answered no to some of those questions, then this is where we need to focus. This is where we need to spend our time first and foremost, because that's the first kind of piece of getting people into your funnel that ultimately leads to getting financial coaching clients. If we don't know where our clients are, then we have to solve that problem. If we're not spending time where they are, we have to solve that problem. If we're not interacting and making ourselves known, we have to solve that problem. All right. However, some of you might feel like you do know where your clients are hanging out. You are spending your time there. You are interacting. And maybe you also have your own community where you're the leader of. Maybe it's your profile where you have the right type of clients following you, or you've already established yourself as a leader in some sort of community, or maybe you've created your own like Facebook group and whatnot. And so there are people there and they're seeing your stuff. They know who you are. They're seeing you. What's the breakdown now? And this second breakdown could be that maybe your content isn't hitting right, or the interactions that you're having aren't hitting right, and ultimately not converting. So here are some checks I want you to do to identify if this is the case. Number one, is your content relevant to the topic that you speak to, as well as your ideal clients, your specific niche of your target audience? Okay, this is one where you might think it is, but I really want you to become an analyzer of your own content and kind of go back and see, what am I creating first and foremost? First, look at your content and understand, is it talking about the topic of ultimately what you sell, right? So if you're selling a program that's specific around budgeting, are we talking about budgeting fairly regularly? I would say it needs to be 80 to 100% of the time you're talking about that topic. I give you a little bit of wiggle room. I always give my clients and myself a little bit of wiggle room to bring in, lifestyle, to bring in personality, to bring in full humanism into our content creation. But ultimately, we need to keep the focus. We don't want to confuse, because a confused buyer is a non-buyer. So we still need to be very direct about what it is that we stand for, what we're about, what our legacy is, and what we want that to be, which is to be known as the woman who provides the budgeting solution, right? Again, using this example, your example might look a little bit different, but we need to make sure that your content is relevant on the topic. The other piece to this, and this is where I find most, especially money people, fall flat, because we're pretty good at going, okay, I got the money stuff, I can educate about money all day, is we fail to make the connection for the ideal client, for our niche in terms of like the target audience part of the niche, not necessarily the topic or the problem part of the niche, but the actual people who have that problem. And here is where you really need to double check and go over your content with a fine-tooth comb, is going, could this piece of content, could this apply to everyone, or does it only truly apply to my ideal clients? A lot of people struggle with this because I think for two reasons. First is they just don't even think about it. We're money people. We're a little bit more analytical. We have a hard time going there and getting creative about like, how can I make this ultra relevant for the end consumer, for my ideal end consumer, which is something specific. So the example I always use here on the podcast is like single moms. Okay. So we're selling a budgeting program for single moms. Okay. So like, does this piece of content that is talking about budgeting or talking about money, maybe a little bit more in general, maybe talking about a debt, maybe talking about savings, doesn't matter. It's falling within that topic of money, and we can always bring it back to budgeting. But could I post this on like a married couples account and it would be relevant? If the answer is yes to that, then we're not doing enough. We're not taking our content there. We're not making it relevant only to single moms. And So the first thing is, I think, a lot of people don't even consider to do that with their content because they're like, okay, got the education out of the way. I made it obvious. I'm talking about my topic. But they just don't even think to take it that extra step and make it relevant for the single mom as opposed to making it relevant for everyone. The second reason I think people fail to do this is because they're scared. They're scared to pigeonhole themselves in this kind of specific niche, or they're scared for whatever reason that if I make it too specific, then it's not going to apply to all of the moms that I would like to work with. And although you might be thinking that and maybe even believing it, the truth is it doesn't hold up. The more you can make your content relatable and relevant to a specific type of person, the harder it hits for them, the more deeply they feel seen and understood, and the more likely they are to want to work with you because now you're speaking directly to them instead of trying to speak to everyone. So we don't want to be generic Jennies. We want to go there with our content, and most people fall flat when it comes to taking their content from trying to just talk about the topic to taking it that extra step and talking about the topic as it relates to your lived situation. So budgeting for a single mom looks a lot different than budgeting for a married couple or budgeting as just a single person in general. And so we got to talk about those specific, unique nuances because that's what allows people to feel that connection with your content. So that's the first thing you need to ask yourself. Is my content relevant? And you might first go, yes, but then take that analysis, go through your content with a fine-tooth comb, figure out, okay, 80 to 100% of this needs to be about the topic, but then every piece of content needs to relate back to your ideal clients. This is definitely easy when you are kind of an evolved version of your ideal client. If you're not quite there, then again, you can use that 80-20 rule of 80% needs to relate back to my ideal clients. 20% can kind of fall, into the cracks of being maybe some personal lifestyle content that I want to share that maybe my clients would aspire to, or, could be relevant, but it doesn't have to be, maybe I'm not a single mom, but I really want to work with single moms. I still want to share pieces of myself, pieces of my life that can still live and breathe in your content. But we still need to make sure that a majority of your content, because you are a brand, this is your business, and your business really relies on your ideal clients, has to be relevant to them. The second question to ask yourself in this bottleneck is, are you fostering engagement? So this is a tricky one, especially if you're starting with a lower number of audience members. And I was going to say captive audience members, but audience members in general, I think, when you're starting with a lower number, it's just harder to see that. But we can actually train it to gain it. And what I mean by that is you can train engagement by getting people started with answering questions, whether that's in your stories. There's a lot of different features that you can use on Instagram to get people to participate, to answer questions, asking really easy questions, yes or no questions so that they can just quickly vote, and different ways to just get people to see that you are interacting with them. Depending on how you feel about this is entirely up to you, but some people will provide, answer their own questions, give themselves their own prompts, just to showcase that this is a safe place to submit a question. And we're gonna do this from here on out. So this is what we do here. And you can submit anything, you can ask a question, you can submit an idea, whatever that looks like. It's ultimately kind of training your audience to see what does engaging with you look like and how can you foster that into the future. And that's not just through stories and whatnot. That can also be through your posts. If you're doing things even YouTube, you can foster engagement through making it really easy for people to answer questions or post something relevant in the comment section. There's a lot of different ways, and you can see how other people do that and then mimic that on your own platform. But consider what that looks like. Become a student of how to foster that engagement, and then work on that and ultimately train it to gain it, because If you build a big audience, but you've never trained that engagement muscle with your audience, then even if you have a really big audience who's not used to answering questions or submitting ideas or answering polls, then it's a little weird for them. So you always want to, start no matter where you're at, even if you don't feel like you have a big enough audience, to really get people used to seeing that like this is something that we do here. The other thing I want you to consider, right? And so this is all falling underneath the bottleneck of, is your content and like your marketing platform and your presence online helping you to convert and ultimately turn your audience into inquiring about your program, booking sales calls, filling out applications. So again, under this umbrella, is your content relevant? Are you fostering engagement? The third thing is, are you actually talking about your offer? So this is something that we tend to shy away from because it's not a normal like muscle memory type of thing. When we get started with content creation, a lot of us like learn, okay, you got to educate and be entertaining and tell stories 80% of the time and then talk about your offer and make a sale 20% of the time. But the truth is you can be referencing the fact that you have something to sell pretty regularly. And people aren't going to put their nose up and turn away because of that, because you are a brand and you are a business and that is expected. So even if it's not like directly selling your offer, you can always reference it really easily. If you're teaching something, you would, reference, well, in my budgeting program, this is what I help my clients achieve. Here are the 3 steps. Or referencing working with clients or whatever that looks like, but you should be regularly talking about your offer. People should know if they're like, okay, who's this test girl? They should know what I'm selling, right? Even if I'm not always talking about it, they need to know about it. And so I need to be referencing it here and there. And then I do for sure have to be having content that is 100% about my offer. Now, that's not 100% of my content, but there needs to be pieces of content where it is very direct what it is that I have and that I'm looking for clients. Because so many of us think like we put it out there once and then people will find it. But social media in general is like a very fleeting thing. Even podcasts, even YouTube videos, even blog posts, they can still be fairly fleeting. So you really want to make sure that you're regularly creating content that pushes the offer as the kind of like the front facing part of that content. But then there's other content that can exist where you're just referencing the offer, or maybe the call to action at the end is to join the offer, but maybe that's not the entire piece of the content. But you need to be talking about it. If you want people to inquire about what it is that you are selling or to book sales calls or to fill out an application, you need to be talking about it, and you need to also let them know how they can take that next step. And there's no shame in that game. Like this, there's a reason that you're creating such wonderful, entertaining, and educational content. And there's also a reason and a need to be able to continue to do that, which is needing to make some money so you can support yourself so that you can continue to provide all the free value that you already provide. The last question that I want you to ask yourself to understand if this is where you're getting stuck, if this is the major bottleneck and what you can be doing, is are you being direct about your intentions? So part of this goes back to your actual content creation. Like when you're not really talking about your offer, you're being really murky and not very direct about what your intentions are, which is ultimately to get clients and change lives. And I think a lot of us, we feel bad because, I don't know, for whatever reason, selling is a bad thing, which it is not. It is not, it is not, it is not. But we've been programmed to believe that is so. And we feel, for whatever reason, guilty about taking people's money, which is not a bad thing, right? They're making an investment and you're going to spend time and effort and energy to help facilitate a truly transformational experience to actually change their lives. So remember that you're doing a good thing by being upfront and direct about what your intentions are. So from a content perspective, that's talking about your offer, that's selling it, that's asking people to sign up, and that's being, forthcoming with all of that information. But also when you're having interactions with people, through conversation, I think a lot of us shy away from having these one-to-one conversations with people who maybe are actively engaging with our content, who are commenting on things, who are following us, who are watching all of our stories. We feel nervous about potentially reaching out because we don't want them to think that we're trying to scam them or sleaze them into anything, which is such a hilarious concept to me because you've worked on creating something so valuable, so powerful, and so life-changing. Why wouldn't you want people to know about it? But I get it. We've all probably been on the other receiving end of something that doesn't feel good, that does feel scammy. And so we don't want to come off as that. And the best way I think that you can not come off as that is to be direct about your intentions, right? Hey, I see that you're interacting with all of my things. I'm curious. Have you been finding this stuff helpful? What specifically are you working on in your financial journey? What has been maybe most helpful for you? And then guide that conversation forward by, it's obvious who you are and what you're doing. And if it's not, if this is a new conversation, introduce yourself as the money coach, as the financial coach for the specific demographic, and be direct about your intentions instead of trying to be sneaky or sly, because that never ends up feeling good. And people also can tell. So just be upfront and honest and direct. And, if someone kindly and politely says no thanks, then we kindly and politely say, well, thank you for being honest. I'm glad to know that you're not interested and hope that we can stay connected. And if, things change, I'm here. I'm always looking to support XYZ individual, and again, going back to my example, I'm always looking to support single moms in their budgeting journey. So if you know anyone or something changes for you, never hesitate to reach out. Be kind, be helpful, but also be direct about your intentions. So if you're feeling okay, that's something that needs to change, then that's something that we should change. And these are all the things that you want to kind of audit and analyze and correct if you feel like what isn't happening. When you look at your business and you're going, okay, I'm not getting clients, well, where is the breakdown? Are you not getting people? Do you feel like you're getting in front of people, but they're not converting into filling out an application or booking a sales call? And if that's the case, this is where we need to focus. The third bottleneck is, okay, you know that you have an audience of people, potential clients, whether that's your own platform, your own group, or another place where you've just been able to really become engaged and become kind of a facilitator of these types of conversations. So you're good there. You're good with the content. You have people reaching out, inquiring about your services, filling out applications, booking sales calls. Then the third bottleneck is that the sales, right? The sales calls or conversations are not converting. So what do we need to do here? So what I'm assuming here is you're having a conversation or you're booking sales calls, and now you're having these kind of one-on-one relationships with individuals, and then they're just not ready to commit. They're not ready to sign up to work with you. And there's a lot of different places where the breakdown can occur here. So we have lots of other podcast episodes on sales mistakes and sales conversations. So definitely go check those out if you haven't yet. But just a quick kind of little debrief, a quick audit of what we can understand here is, first of all, I'm assuming you're having this conversation, and then a lot of times what can happen is someone gives you a verbal yes. They're like, this sounds amazing. I'm definitely interested. You share with them the price and they're like, yes, this is something that I would like to continue forward with and do. So that's awesome. That feels so good. But what doesn't feel good is when you get off the phone, you send them the email, you expect them to book their next call or your first call or pay you or whatever, and all of a sudden you just don't hear anything. So this can happen, and unfortunately it happens more regularly than you would expect. I'm not saying it's going to happen all the time, but like it happens. And I find it always shocking because I'm like, how can a human being just like drop off the face of the earth? I could never do that. And you probably feel the same, but it does happen. So what can we do to prevent this? Well, a lot of times, I always encourage my clients, if you get a yes on the call, like they're ready to go, I do encourage my clients to collect payment on the call. Now, that is not saying at all, please do not do this, forcing someone to pay you right then and there, or guilting them in, or having them, pull out a credit card and put it on a credit card when that is like the last thing that they should be doing. But if someone is ready, then I think what happens is a lot of people don't see this as an option, or they don't feel comfortable breaching this conversation. And it actually can be quite easy, and it can be full of grace and patience. And also, if the person isn't ready, then you can just say, oh, totally understand. Let's create a follow-up plan instead. But a lot of my clients, if they're dealing with, getting verbal yeses and then there's no follow through, no follow up from the other person, they get ghosted ultimately, then I'm usually like, well, do you try to collect the payment on the call? Do you try to get them onboarded in that moment? And usually they say, no, I didn't even think about that, or I didn't think that I could do that. And the reality is you can, and you should at least try, but obviously with respect to that person's boundaries. So this is how you do that. First, someone says, yes, they're interested in, just go into the conversation of, is this something that you want to get started with now? And in that sense, we could take a deposit or the first monthly payment or the in full payment, whichever one you're cool with, you want to get started with. And then what we can do is we can use our remaining time to get you set up with onboarding, book our first call, and all of that good stuff. You don't have to use all those words. You can just say, like, is this something that, are you ready to get started now? Are you in a position to make the investment now? And then have a conversation about it. So if they're like, yes, this sounds good. Okay, are you in a position to get started now? And then they'd be like, yeah, well, okay, what are my options payment wise? I'm assuming you've already talked about this. But if you haven't, then you would go into, well, here's the in full plan, here's the payment plan. And I always also have my clients give them the opportunity to also offer something like a deposit, especially if the client wants to make the in full payment, but maybe can't do it right now. Maybe they can make a $100 or $200 deposit right now. So at least you can get something started so that you can start the transaction of, okay, now we have this deposit. We can actually reserve you a spot and get you locked in for coaching and really make that game plan, because you really wouldn't want to do that. And I tell my clients, I wouldn't do that until you have some sort of financial investment. And that's why, if you can do it on the call, it's just so much easier to facilitate all of that right then and there. Now, you'll have instances where they're like, oh, I have to move some things around, or I have to talk to someone or whatever. And that's where then the next question is, do you have a specific follow-up schedule and template that you follow in your sales conversations? A lot of people don't, especially if they are then having this issue with ghosting. So I always recommend to, while you're on this call, if the person is a yes, they're verbally saying yes, but they aren't able to put money down right now, that's totally okay. No pressuring necessary. They don't need to put it on a credit card or take out a personal loan to get started. We can create a plan together. And so that might look like, great. Let's say they have to think about it, or they want to talk to a partner about it, then, or they need to just like move some money around and, aren't even ready to do something like a deposit right now. Then I would ask them, how much time do you need to get that done? And you also want to, hold your own boundaries too. So I usually give 2 to 3 days max, or like if you're talking on a Friday, then let's talk on Monday again. So give them the weekend, but really be what is it? Not like strict, but like lovingly respect your own boundaries as well as being respectful of theirs. And so, I can hold your spot for 2 days. What if we jumped on a call in 2 days' time just to revisit this? That should give you enough time to have this conversation. And mostly usually they're totally fine with that. Conversations don't take that long. Usually it's with a partner who they're going to see that night. And so they're willing and ready to jump on a call in a 2-day or 3-day or over the weekend time frame. So work with them on that. Be respectful of your own boundaries as well as theirs, but set a specific follow-up schedule that includes, let's just book a quick 15-minute call in, X days in the future. So set the time, set the day, send them that calendar invite and have them agree like, yep, that sounds good. The other thing you can then do is follow up with them and let them know you'll also be seeing a follow-up email from me, which will have all the details for us to get started if you choose. And if you've had that discussion and you're ready to go ahead and make the payment, fill out the thing, sign up with the application, whatever you have them do, whatever your onboarding process is. But that way you can then use that follow-up call as your onboarding call so that you can schedule your first calls together, figure out how you're giving any sort of support, whether it's email or you're using Voxer or whatever. That's the perfect opportunity to do it again on a call later in time. So a specific follow-up schedule really provides structure and holds someone accountable to following through with their verbal yes. So those are the two things that you need to make sure that you do. If you're getting verbal yeses, but then getting ghosted and not having any follow through on the client's end, is you need to provide that follow through structure. That is super important. The second thing that might be tripping you up, maybe you're not even getting to that verbal yes because there are just loads of objections. So this is something that so many people struggle with, and I've struggled with it in the past too, but it's something that we do want to and is a service for both us as the coaches as well as our clients. Even if they don't become paying clients, it's really good for us to work on and for us to have discussions around objections. So when we're talking about objections, these often relate to the client's fears about taking the next step forward with your program. So the first one that's always a main objection is the actual cost, the investment to join the program. So that's number one objection. And it's an interesting one and oftentimes perceived as very tricky for money coaches because it's kind of that catch-22 of money coaching, which we've also done a podcast episode on, and we will link it up in the show notes for you if you want to go listen to that. But it's the idea that, okay, these people, their biggest issue is maybe not having enough money or needing to save more money or needing to pay off debt or having too much debt. And now they need to potentially take a step back in order to spring forward by making this investment in themselves with money coaching. So that's a normal objection. We see it all the time. And we have an entire episode dedicated to handling that objection. Other objections oftentimes include time. So someone being concerned that they don't have enough time to invest in the coaching process or in, doing a budget or managing their finances, which is just this is not a podcast where I'm talking and teaching you how to handle these objections. So I need to save it. But just if you don't have time to manage your money, that's what ultimately controls your life in a lot of ways. You got to make the time, but I digress. A lot of times you'll see objections around partners and whether they are invested in this process, whether they are interested in pursuing this process. So understanding how to deal with those. And then there's lots of other kind of random objections that might come about. It might just be a bad time. So time, not necessarily that they don't have the time, but right now might not be a good time. And a lot of other things that can come about. So what I want you to consider is, first and foremost, this is super important because I just think there's unfortunately a lot of bad advice out there coming from business coaches who are teaching, especially coaches, how to sell and handle objections in this way is, please remember, you're not trying to convince anyone that that their objections are not worthy. And even though I just a little bit laughed and poked fun at the idea that if someone doesn't feel like they have the time to invest in their finances and managing their finances, that's silly, it's still something that you need to come from a place of understanding and seeking to understand. And so it's not exactly a laughing matter when you're in that moment. And there's no reason for you to act like I just did upfront with a client, because that is the time to be understanding and actually get to the root of what is really going on there. So even if you think like these objections are ridiculous, you're not in the position to convince someone that their objection isn't a valid enough reason to not join your program, which is a tricky place to be in when you're trying to make a sale. But we aren't trying to pressure, force, or convince anyone of anything. So that's making the payment when it comes to getting a verbal yes and then wanting to try to collect payment on the call. And that's also maneuvering and managing these objections on the call. But what you should absolutely be doing is having a discussion about it, seeking to understand. So if someone has this objection around time, right, I might initially laugh at it, and between you and I be like, hey, this is something that you don't get to choose not to have time to manage your finances, because it is a necessary evil. So you have to make the time, right? But we understand that as money coaches, as people who've done this work and see the importance and the need of making the time. But your potential client may not. And so the first thing I want to explore is getting a better understanding of this objection by actually just having a discussion about it. I think a lot of coaches, when we're in this position, we feel so vulnerable because we're opening up ourselves to say, hey, I've created this thing. I know there's value. I need to believe that there's value in it for you. And you need to believe so much in the person you're talking to that they can do it and that this is going to be valuable for them so that they will make the investment back into you. That's a very vulnerable place to come from. And when you're opening it up and kind of opening those potential wounds for them to reject you, right? When they come to you with an objection, the first thing you might want to do is close down. But the thing that you need to do is explore that objection and understand, okay, what do you think is missing? What do you think is lacking in this program? What could we do to help make sure that this can work for you? And what's interesting is when you display that you're willing to go there with them, right? If it's a time issue, it's okay, totally understand. You're afraid that this is going to take too much time. What can we do? What can I do as your coach to make this possible for you? Because, if we really sit and think about it, money is such a critical part of our lives. And if we don't make the time to manage it, it won't get managed, and it will, the position that they're in will just continue to happen. It'll continue to fester. So you really need to come from a place of understanding and be willing to discuss it. Same thing with the investment, which again feels weird, right? You're not looking for someone to convince you to discount your services. We definitely don't want to do that. We don't want to, just completely bend over backwards and let someone determine how much they're going to pay us. But we can open the door and have a conversation about what that investment really looks like for them in their current budget. This is the golden opportunity for you to put your coaching hat on and actually display to this person what it's like to work with you as a coach is in this objection handling. Even if you have a discussion about it and it doesn't go nowhere, it doesn't go anywhere, and you ultimately determine, okay, I don't think this is the best fit for us. Let's, maybe set a follow-up schedule, but we also maybe just go our separate ways, whatever that might look like for you. But it's still so worthy to take the time to have that discussion around those objections. So if the breakdown is around objections, right, you're not even getting to the verbal yes because there are too many objections standing in the way, or you're having a hard time dealing with it, know that there's a way to manage objections. We've talked about some of the most important ones here on the podcast. And again, we'll link up that Catch-22 episode in the show notes, but also know that there's plenty of great trainings out there. I have a very special sales training available to anyone who purchases the pricing formula, which you can get by going to wanderwealthy.com/pricing. There's an opportunity for you to invest in the sales training at checkout. And that is something that would definitely help you with this sales process. So I would not sleep on that. But, any way that you can see that handling objections is really just about having a discussion and kind of being willing to be flexible with the client around how can we make this work for you. The third piece that might be the breakdown for you is, you get the objections, maybe you just get the no. There's a ton of different reasons why this might not be a good fit. But maybe there's something that you can offer that could be a good fit. And so my question to you is, do you have a downsell, or what one of my coaches used to call a secret menu item? So something that you can offer that maybe you don't publicly market or sell, but something that you can offer in that moment where maybe the person doesn't have the time to be able to do one-on-one coaching and get on the phone once a week or once every other week, but maybe they could go through their own self-paced program. And maybe that's something that you could offer from your program, is just access to the curriculum, where you're not publicly selling this because sometimes those are harder to sell, and usually they have to be at a cheaper price, but it's something that could capture this lead and provide them with what they need when they're not able to fully invest their time or maybe all the money into the highest level of training with you. And so what that could look like is just self-paced access to the curriculum of your program, no coaching calls involved. So the price is going to be lower. Also, the time investment is going to be lower, but they're still going to have access to the material. So that's just one example of a downsell. Another one could be something like an intensive. So it's at a cheaper price point. But again, it's not going to be like this long, maybe 3 or 6 month program with you. Instead, it's going to be, we're going to get together for 90 minutes on this, random Saturday, 1 month in the future. And we're really going to workshop your finances and get you into a really good spot, where then maybe it'll get you into a better position to potentially join my program in the future. And you're going to sell that at a price point that, makes sense. You're still going to get paid for it. You're still going to get compensated. And it also allows these sales calls to not be for moot, but for something that you can offer on the back end. So that's another consideration to be able to provide if you're also having a lot of trouble, getting your sales calls to convert into clients. But that's kind of a bonus / last case thing, because obviously we want to be selling your signature program. And if we're finding that even after being able to handle these discussions, not discussions, but even able to have discussions around objections, but then them still not making that step, we might have a price market mismatch that we might need to fix. That also might look like you adjusting your offering slightly so that you are being properly compensated for what it is that you're offering, but maybe that's something that you need to consider, especially if the main objection is around the investment or around the amount of time that they would have to invest in doing this work with you. So consider that. And then if you're just getting verbal yeses, but then no follow through, that's more of we have a systems issue. We're not putting some sort of systems, schedules, and specific follow-ups in place that we definitely can correct as soon as possible. So all things to consider if the breakdown is in closing those sales. So that's it. Those are the 3 bottlenecks to assess. If you're having a hard time finding clients to join your program, go through those 3 bottlenecks. And I hope you listened to this episode and you were actually able to determine and spot what that is and what you need to be focusing on. And I would, head down focus on it for the next 1 to 2 months, that thing specifically, so that you can improve that part of your funnel. And then And then you can reassess. Then maybe you have a bottleneck at a later part of the funnel and you can work on that next. But for now, we need to focus on like the earliest one, catch it, fix it, and then go from there. So give that a shot. Reach out to me if you have any questions or if you'd love to discuss. And yeah, remember that there's lots available for you over at wanderwealthy.com to support you in building your money coaching business. You can get access to the pricing formula, which will help you price your offers with data-backed calculations so that you're not just throwing a pricing wad of spaghetti at the wall to hope and see if it sticks, but instead pricing strategically. And also, like I said, that gives you an opportunity to access my simple sales masterclass, which is going to walk you through lots of helpful sales tips. So if selling is what's keeping you up at night, you definitely want to get your hands on that as well. So go to wanderwealthy.com/pricing to get access to both of those things. And that's it for now. Until next week, I hope you wander wealthy.